Hi everyone, this is I'm Gary Browning, and I'm delighted to host this webinar on A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan biopic, which has been such a great success in the last few kind of months. And I'm absolutely delighted to have with me some wonderful guests. There's the legendary Scarlett Rivera, who everyone knows from the wonderful kind of violin that she played on Desire, perhaps one of the favorite albums of Dylan from 1976. And she was in that remarkable Rolling Thunder tour, which we've all loved, and which Martin Scorsese did the kind of wonderful kind of film of. And she kind of plays in amazingly different styles: Celtic world music on the violin, jazz, and with Dylan, and with some great folk people, and plays herself some solo things. She sings too. She's done a great version of Hurricane, and she's done a great version recently of A Series of Dreams, that underrated Dylan song. So she's a wonderful person to have, and she knows Bob Dylan, if anyone does know Bob Dylan. Not a lot of people are close to him but don't know him. But anyway, she can maybe share some wonderful thoughts and close thoughts on Dylan. And we've also got Constantine Sandys, who is a philosopher and kind of has written many books. And he co-edited this Dylan 80 book with me, and it was a wonderful adventure to do that with him. We got together an amazing set of different people who all had something to say about Dylan, and it was a lot of fun, and that was great. He writes lots of books on Wittgenstein philosophy. He's speaking at the Oxford Literary Festival, which is coming up in April. So it's great to have him on, and he looks at moral conduct and so on, and he'll be kind of focusing a bit on that. And I've also got Jan Butler, who's a senior lecturer in popular music at Oxford Brookes, and she does lots of work, interesting work in different areas. I've worked with her before. She kind of looks at how film and popular music can be used in primary schools. And she's also kind of interested in the liveliness of musical performers and how we are to undertake that. I thought we'd start the ball rolling here in thinking about this film, A Complete Unknown, in the context of it just having failed to get any Oscar in the Academy Awards last night. I was actually quite upset. I don't normally get upset about Oscars and so on, but it reminded me that I first started listening to Dylan in 1963 when I heard Freewheeling for the first time. And I thought it was a fantastic album. And one of the things I liked about it was that it seemed to me it was throwing up in the air and juggling with high art and low art. Like, popular music at that time wasn't seen as a great high art, culturally prestigious. But it seemed to me that people like Robert Johnson, Hank Williams, Woody Guthrie were great artists. And I think popular films can be great art. And those films which mix popularity with artistic achievement are really good. Whereas I think I liked a lot of the films that picked up Oscars, including Anora and The Brutalist, but they seem to me on the high art end rather. And the great thing about this film of Dylan, about Dylan, um, it seems to me, is that it mixes high artistic achievement with a kind of directness and kind of popularity, which brings Dylan and that world of the early 1960s music scene to everyone, and not aficionados, and not people. It's a popular film, which is great. What does the panel think about this film? Do you think it deserved an Oscar or two? What about you, Jan? What did you think?
Thought it was. I was quite surprised it didn't win for sound, especially because Timothy Chalamet's other film, Dune 2, did win for sound. And Dune 2 has a really extraordinary soundtrack, but actually was quite an overwhelming sonic experience in the cinema. You couldn't always hear what was happening, whereas I thought the way that they treated the music and the dialogue and the sounds in the Dylan film really did work together to bring the world of the 60s to life. Like when they were moving through the streets of New York, you heard fragments of everything that was going on around them in these sonic soundscapes. I thought, yeah, I think, yeah, the other films were very good, but I think sound-wise, Dylan was was excellent. Yeah.
Okay, well that sounds good. What did you make of it, Constantine? Would you have given it an Oscar?
I thought Chalamet was going to get an Oscar, but you know, not saying Adrian Brody didn't deserve it, and actually I thought the supporting cast were extremely good as well. So it was a shame, but I think kind of I stayed up for them. I never normally watch the Oscars, and I think two-thirds of the way through it was pretty obvious it probably wouldn't win anything. Um, and it's odd because, like you said, in some ways it feels like they try to make an Oscar-winning film. Maybe they tried too hard in that. I love the film, by the way, but maybe they tried too hard in that respect, and some of the more unconventional films ended up doing better. But I was disappointed. I thought it deserved, a few Oscars.
Okay. Okay. And we'll move on. Can I just remind people, if you want to put questions, people listening into the quick for us to answer them in the latter part of this video, do kind of put them in the question and answer box. Okay. But Scarlett, were you disappointed?
I was disappointed and shocked because I thought it was a given. I felt it was, of course, Timothy Chalamet is going to win an Oscar for this. It was deserved. The supporting cast was superb. The treatment of the whole era, the sound, all of it, exceptionally done well. And I thought it would win a minimum of 2 or some Oscars.
Yeah, I thought it was a great film. And I think before we started, I think you were saying it's also bringing Dylan to a younger audience or to a new audience, and that's
yes, absolutely.
And that's great. Yeah, I know we put some questions into a poll, and we'll get the answers to them in the next in the ensuing minutes. We'll get where we are with the poll. Yeah. But it's telling me I can't vote, so that's fine. But I'll see where we're going. But one of the questions I put was, yeah, how good was Timothy Chalamet in the role of Bob Dylan on a 1 to 5 scale, with 5 being brilliant? What did people make of? What did you make of it, Scarlett? Because you were with Dylan for a period quite close.
Yeah, and I've known him after the fact for years as well in private situations. Absolutely a 5. I mean, he captured his every nuance of his voice, his singular way of talking, gestures, mannerisms, but also the way that he can look into someone or something with absolute as if it's an X-ray machine, right dead through them, and very. I thought that was very astute of him to capture that. And
yeah, I thought it was powerful, and it's interesting that you've known Dylan, and when you say there that Dylan has this capacity to focus attention at such an exacting way, that sounds quite powerful. And he's done that to you, has he?
Not to me. I mean, this I'm sure he did, but in a very soft way. But in general, he does it in a very penetrating way, and it could be in a critical way as well.
Yeah. Okay. But you think it was very plausible. Timothy Chalamet got Dylan, and you're saying he sounded like him, but he also just the way the intonation, the way he speaks, the way he thinks, that was captured.
It was.
Yeah. And Dylan is obviously a complex character, it's not kind of just good or bad, or kind of, he's obviously got lots of qualities there, different qualities.
A man of multitudes, whereas Joan is more more two-dimensional in that she's ambitious and competitive.
Right.
And
Okay. What did you think of the Chalamet performance, Constantine?
If it's from 1 to 5, he goes up to 6, I think. He was really wonderful. And I mean, one thing that, because we talk about does he get Dylan right, but between 61 and 65, which is sort of the period of the film, Dylan's voice, as well as maybe his character, I can't speak of as much, but his voice changes in those songs, in those early songs he's singing when he first arrives. Even by 63, it's very different, and Chalamet captures all those little differences in that voice at the start that's less New Yorky, and and then it kind of becomes the sort of Dylan of freewheeling, and then it changes again by the time we're even in Bringing It All Back Home, let alone Highway 61, and he captured all those little kind of differences, and also the way he speaks, which we know from kind of different interviews, and he does all that. So it's not just like he's got an early 60s Dylan. It's much more fine-grained than that. Very impressive.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah, and that's kind of right. That's kind of interesting. That's really interesting. Actually, I'll look at that one. But Jan, did you think Chalamet was very convincing?
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. He yes, everything everybody said I totally agree with. I think as well that his musicianship was very impressive. He's not a guitarist before this film, and as far as I know, and actually Monica as well, who played Joan, they had to learn to sing and play in this style for this film. And I thought they did that really convincingly, very impressive. And but I've heard that this is one of the few silver linings of the pandemic. So the Elvis film as well. Austin Butler did the same thing with Elvis. He had hours and hours in the pandemic because there was nothing to do.
Yeah.
Studied all the nuances. So and this film was done in the same period of time, and to some extent, these actors have had an extraordinarily rich amount of time to do this in a way that they might not have done it otherwise. So I think, and you can see the hours and hours and hours that have gone into it that you wouldn't usually get in this role, which I think does help. Yeah, with the authenticity of the performances, you really believe that that he is Bob Dylan, that you're watching a real expert performer.
Absolutely. But I think I could have had 15 years or 40 years kind of practicing the guitar and kind of singing, and I wouldn't have got there. So I think hats off, and my hat's over there to Timothée Chalamet there. But one thing I would say is watching him at the Oscars, I turned off before the end of the Oscars ceremony. Chalamet seemed quite kind of frail, quite kind of thin, quite kind of delicate in some ways, and also very obliging to like Conan O'Brien and the kind of others who were maybe being a bit kind of satirical about him. He was very kind of obliging and accommodating in a way that I don't remember Dylan being kind of simply kind of obliging and accommodating. And that's one thing. That made me feel that maybe Chalamet really did act well, because he came across as a very convincingly as someone who knew he was really good and was inspired and was kind of powerful. The other thing is, and maybe with Scarlett, some people I think have said that the film perhaps doesn't capture the humor of Dylan, because Dylan's got a pretty powerful sense of humor and irony, which doesn't fully come across in the film. A bit it comes across. What did you think about that?
One scene that really got it for me was when he was telling Joan, Joan, I think you're trying too hard. And, your songs are kind of like oil paintings in a dentist office. And she goes,
and that's, yeah.
She said, well, I didn't want to be asked, she said. That was very humorous.
Yeah. So you think it does capture a bit of the humor of Dylan? Yeah, a fairly hard-edged humor.
But the crueler side, maybe.
Yeah. However, it doesn't. I mean, like Dylan's And there's a tendency to think that Dylan, I mean, his songs are of a piece. But in fact, they vary quite a lot, don't they? And like, he makes fun and humor out of the fear about World War III and nuclear war. You know, Talking World War III Blues is a humorous depiction of the imminence of tragedy, and he can be quite funny in lots of ways in his songs. And the talking songs like Talking New York, you know, people have got knives and forks and they haven't got a lot to eat and they're going to cut something. And you know, the Talking Bear Mountain Picnic Disaster Blues is a kind of satire about kind of making money. So Dylan can, I suppose, in this film, it does show the song. If I could do it all over again, I'd do it all over you, which I think Dylan didn't sing very many times at all live, but you know, that's shown. But I think the humor of Dylan might have come across. But you're Scarlett, you're saying it did come across quite powerfully in the scene with Joan there.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I think looking at the early poll ratings, I mean there's a few votes in on people saying that it was a brilliant kind of performance by Chalamet, but not many in yet. There's people who have voted on, is this the best music biopic ever? About a third, there are 7 responses saying yes, some saying no, and some unsure, which is fair enough. I'll go to you first on this, Jan. Do you think it's the best music biopic? You've written on music biopics.
Yeah, I have. I think it probably the best music biopic for you alters according to what music you like. So I think it's very difficult to say what the best music biopic is ever. But I think this is really up there because it does capture what it feels like. It captures a musical moment of history and the excitement of that moment for a new audience, as we mentioned earlier, I think that it really captures a bit of music history and brings it to life that is now, if you just listen to the records or if you just watch the concert footage from the time, the impact of this going electric moment probably doesn't come across. So from that point of view, I think this was excellent, an excellent biopic, because it's not just about this man's life, it's about his place in music history, the role that he played, what it was like to live through these times, and the importance music had at this time, commenting on what was happening. So I think it goes beyond a lot of the rags to riches, tragic artist stories of biopics, which I love. But yeah, this did say more than that.
Well, yeah, and you love biopics, do you?
Yeah, I do. I like the rags to riches story.
Which other biopics do you think are really worth watching?
Well, actually, I really like one of my favorites is Amadeus about Mozart. I think that's really good.
Do you think this is like that? Some people think this is like it because Mozart is depicted as this guy who's inspired but morally not great.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does. I think it's different because the Mozart seems to just get hit by genius and you don't see him working. Whereas this, you see Bob Dylan working really hard all the time. He's writing, he's creating, he's focused. I think actually this is actually a fairly realistic depiction of how much work there is involved in being a genius.
Yeah.
Whereas the Amadeus doesn't really capture that. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Well, thanks a lot. That's great. What about you, Constantine? Is this the best music biopic for you? Or
So I think Jan's right that it really depends on what kind of music you like. But and I've seen, there's some great ones from La Bamba to Control and the Joy Division one and the Ian Jury one as well. But the Tina Turner one. But one question is it a biopic? And I remember when I'm Not There, the Todd Haynes film came out with all the different people portraying Dylan. I remember thinking at the time, this is the only way this could be done. It would be really lame if they played it straight and so on. And I was really nervous about watching this. I actually thought I'd hate it, and I really loved it. And it's harder to do it this way, and they really pulled it off. But is it a biopic? I mean, it takes us from 61 to 65. So much happens, but it's a very tiny slice of Bob Dylan's life, if you think about it. It's not a life film. In some ways, it's like a Greek tragedy, because you have a kind of prologue and an epilogue, and then you have 3 acts. You have this, and with Dylan, they all have to do with change. You have sort of Dylan comes to New York, Dylan becomes a big folk artist, Dylan goes electric, and then you have the kind of denouement. And so it's got these kind of 3 acts, and the kind of changes you get between them. And in that way, it's really stands out compared to many other sort of so-called biopics, I think.
You mentioned the Todd Haynes "I'm Not There," which is an interesting kind of take on Dylan, played by different people. And a very young black guy boy plays the Woody Guthrie version of Dylan. Kate Blanchett plays the hip kind of rock Dylan. And Mark Kermode, the film critic, has said that he thought this film was maybe too straight a biopic, and that something like Todd Haynes's "I'm Not There" is better. But I'm interested, Constantine, you think this isn't a straight biopic, and in fact you, Jan, were saying it's not a straightforward biopic, it's doing something else, and it's certainly bringing in the music scene, isn't it? Or certainly the folk revival scene in America in the early 60s. And I was quite drawn into the story myself. And it's not a straightforward focus on one person. It's locating him in a certain time and so on. Yeah. What did you make of it as a biopic, Scarlett?
I thought it was exceptional, and I do watch a lot of music documentaries from John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Amy Winehouse, which I loved, all of those, and Tina Turner. And I want to go out and see Becoming Led Zeppelin now, but it's measured up tremendously for me. And I didn't think it was, obviously it's not his whole life. It's the first 10 years, but it's the formative years, and it's the years of radical change and morphing into being who he is, who he's.
Yeah.
And it made you feel like you were a part of his morphing into who he was literally becoming, and stepping into the shoes that were kept getting bigger and bigger by the day,
Yeah, and what Jan said, that it's you thought it was a very powerful evocation of the work of genius, someone working really hard at it. And you're saying you see him develop, and Constantine saying that. I mean, I think it also benefits from not simply focusing on Dylan. Like Pete Seeger Edward Norton plays him pretty powerfully, doesn't he? He comes across pretty powerfully, and as a kind of locating Dylan on that kind of basis, and so, yeah, there are some pretty powerful figures in there. And the Johnny Cash depiction, it's not entirely true, in that Johnny Cash was not at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, but it is the correspondence between Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan is actually the correspondence that there was. Jeff Rosen, Dylan's manager, I believe, gave to James Mangold, the director, the actual correspondence, and they used it word for word. So and Johnny
so I think, was it you who was telling me, I think so Bob kept Johnny's letters, but Johnny didn't keep Bob's. Maybe it was Mick Gold who was telling me, so the ones from Johnny are taken word from word, but the others are kind of reconstructed, right, in some way.
Right, yeah. There are certainly some powerful figures there, though, and that's important. People, there's about a third who think this is the best music biopic they've seen. The other question I wanted to ask, and first of you to you, Constantine, is, should Dylan have gone electric? And I will say that from the poll, I think people are saying yes, he should have gone. He should have gone electric. I think we've got quite a few saying that. So
I saw the poll. Nobody said no. Some people were unsure,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But nobody said, in a way, I don't think there was even a question or decision for him. It was, so it's not like, oh, should I go electric? This was going to happen. It happened. There's no question about it. There's a beautiful scene. It's a bit cruel towards Seeger. There's a beautiful scene in the film where he's recording Highway 61, and he's got like the whistle and everything. And then it cuts to Pete Seeger doing the black and white television show and with his banjo, and suddenly you think, oh my God, this thing that was exciting a few years ago suddenly seems so aged. And you know, Dylan is you know, going to be Dylan and doing these things and all the other changes that happen later. So there's no
So
question
you don't
about
think
it.
it was an existential kind of crisis which Dylan answered? It was going that way anyway.
I think it's not purely musical in that, and Scarlett will correct me if she knows better, but my understanding is that he was also just lonely being up there on his own all the time, and it was more fun with a band, and that's part of it. Obviously, there's the British invasion and all these other things going on, and his love of rock and roll and Little Richard, and he'd done rock and roll before in high school. He'd done Mixed Up Confusion. Does that appear in the film? Yes, it does
No.
at some point. No.
I don't think it does.
So it wasn't, I think, to him maybe such
But
a
the
huge
film
thing.
does have him say to Pete Seeger in the car early on that he
Yeah,
likes Little Richard and so on.
yeah.
And so you don't think it's such a, it's depicted well though, isn't it, in the film? I think.
Oh, it's momentous when the contrasts are momentous, and when you get, we were talking about this earlier, when you get to because at Newport 65 he actually does loads of acoustic stuff in the workshops and things, but when you get to that evening performance, I actually thought it's more electrifying in the film than if you go and watch the Newport 65 performance, which is a brilliant performance, but it doesn't sound quite as, I think it would sound dated to us if they had just done it like that, whereas it sounds really quite powerful, and you don't sit there thinking, oh, I wish he was, you know, playing. But one thing, if I can say one more thing,
do.
And this is true to the set list, he's playing, you know, Maggie's Farm, which is of course a protest song and is based on Penny's Farm, which Lomax had recorded, and that's sort of seen as a kind of betrayal because it's all noisy and electric. And then when they finally hear him come out with his acoustic, okay, you get Mr. Tambourine Man, but then of course you get It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, which is the biggest kiss-off song, you know, in the world. So in a way, he starts with a protest song, and when he gives them what they think they want, he's actually, you know, saying we're done here. So that's quite interesting, I thought.
This book, the Dylan Goes Electric by Elijah Wald, is the one that the film is loosely based upon. And it's a good book actually, and Dylan himself says he thinks this book is really good. But in that, I just get the sense that the Newport Folk Festival and the American Folk Revival was quite complicated. The film probably simplifies the conflict between acoustic and electric and so on. But I guess there is a sense in which the the American Folk Revival was reviving traditional songs and the way they were played. But along with that went people inventing new songs and being political, which were different but connected. And then there was also a sweeter form of folk music by people like the Kingston Trio and so on, who were having some popular success. So I think and then there were electric blues black artists and some white, like mostly the Butterfield Blues Band. But so there are different forms of kind of folk music in that American Folk Revival. But I think the film simplifies that to some extent, but also I suppose it did offer something. This was connected to the liberal civil rights movement, to the sense that everyone could be part of a community of like-minded people who were kind of performing and and recognizing and rehearsing and continuing traditional music and adapted music and so on from that era. So I think it's quite a powerful vision, even if it was simplified. And Dylan breaking with that is breaking with something, you know, something worthwhile. And so what Seeger stood for was something worthwhile. But I guess Dylan in Electricity in the film stands for freedom as well, doesn't it? To make music as you see it. What did you make of it, Jan?
I think the point, the idea of the collective thing that you're talking about, the fact that this was a kind of political voice that the folk scene was trying to revive is really cleverly captured in the film. So there's kind of three set pieces. There's Pete Seeger playing a Wimboe, and everybody joins in, and you see Bob watching from the back of the stage and seeing the power of this moment of somebody leading the song. And actually, and this picks up on the sound aspects as well that I was talking about, and that Constantine has alluded to, because in the cinema, which is the only place I've been able to see the film because it's only just come out, but in the cinema, that sound rumbles through your feet. You're part of that audience. The sound is nothing like it would have been at the time to Pete and Bob on the stage. You are kind of immersed in that sound, and you join the collective sonically. And then it happens again. So Bob's playing The Times They Are Changing, and everybody miraculously joins in from the first chorus. They've not heard it before, and they all join in, and it's the same sound, the same all-encompassing audience sound, which again, it would not have sounded like that if you were at the festival, but it's this really rich, moving sound. And then when he goes electric, and alienates the audience, you just get these individual voices coming out of the crowd, and the break between the audience it's like sonically you're on the stage with the band, the music's overwhelming, you can feel it coming through your feet. Yeah, it's really those three moments, they really highlight that. It's like it was a collective thing, and you see Pete nodding along going, yes, look, he's our thing, he's driving forward, and it's just amazing. And then the shock of that moment, yeah, it's really impactful in a way that I've studied this period for a long time, and I had never really got why this was such a momentous moment. But having seen this film, it's like, oh, I see. Yes, I can. It was very powerful at explaining that.
And can you see merit on both sides, like an argument for the American folk revival and not going electric?
I can, but as Constance said, I think the rock movement that emerged, I mean, they were trying to do a similar thing. So I think, but using different means that appeal to a wider audience. So once you've embraced electricity, you've embraced the whole thing of mediation and reaching mass audiences, and you can get your message to more people. So I think I can see I can see merits on both sides, but I think the rock movement, once it had really got going and they were really inspired by Bob Dylan, they felt they were doing a similar thing, but they were just using a different means to do it. They wanted to
Okay.
induce
about-
love across the world.
Okay. Thank you. What about you, Scarlett? What did you think? Do you think Dylan should have gone electric?
Can you stop a Rolling Stone going down a hill? No, it
Yeah,
was an unstoppable moment, and it's part of the evolution of becoming an artist, is to find yourself, and not to be stuck in a genre that it's like, oh, this is a good little genre, I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life. That was never going to be him, and
never going to be him. No. I mean, one thing I was thinking when I was watching the film is that they play some songs, and I think Jan and others have said, you know, there's a tremendous lot of songs and powerful songs in this film, but they didn't play My Back Pages from Another Side, which Dylan made in 1964, where he talks about he thought about freedom just being equality at school, but he's now so much older, he doesn't think like that. So he's seeing a break between freedom of the individual and expressiveness, a break between that and equality and community, which had been there before. So I think they might have included that song, which registers his change, you know.
Another Side is quite a controversial album, and something you said earlier about the the humorous side of Bob Dylan, which really comes across on that album. And I guess it was maybe one thing too many to put into the mix, because we've got acoustic electric, we've got this kind of authentic versus the fake. At some point there's the authentic electric stuff, and then sort of white men playing blues, and the kind of stories. He can be a bit post-truth Dylan with his stories of the carnival and whatever, and there's this kind of fact-based folk music, and then this stuff that Dylan's just kind of making up, and then there's the very serious folk movement and
Yeah.
this really humorous Dylan, where another side of Bob Dylan, if you contrast it to the albums before that, is just there's some serious stuff in there, but boy, is it funny as well.
Yeah, and they on another side, there's Motor Psycho Nightmare, where he kind of satirizes the film Psycho, which is interesting. Yeah. Yeah, someone's written in, there's a question, it would have been very difficult for Timothy Chalamet to get the humor of Dylan, at this stage. But there we are.
There's
Yeah,
nothing Timothy Chalamet can't do.
yeah,
No.
well, I think he did a remarkably good job. And I saw that Ray Falk, who was the organizer of the 1969 Isle of Wight Festival, he's written in and said that it was an extraordinary achievement of Timothy Chalamet to act in this film, and he deserved the Oscar because it's almost beyond acting, to assume the identity of someone like Dylan and do it very convincingly in the early 60s. That it is a remarkable achievement. So I think that's fine. I was going to throw in the American folk revival also is connected to the politics and the liberal politics in America of the early 60s, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement it morphed into. And some people have said this film doesn't capture all of that politics. I mean, I think there's a limit to what a film can do. We do see the March on Washington in the background. We do get some talk about civil rights, and Seeger at the beginning and the Un-American kind of activities committee. So it strikes me there are references to it, but I think Constantine, I talked to you earlier sometime, and you were saying that they might have highlighted the Civil Liberties kind of committee and Dylan getting the Tom Paine Award.
It's not necessarily that I think it should have been in the film, but what's interesting about that is that it's in 64 and he's getting booed. That's the first time. That's the first kind of thing we know of that he does that people don't like, and that doesn't go down well. At least, I mean, a lot of people like the electric stuff, of course, but it's the first one that's kind of suddenly very controversial, and because of saying he sees a bit of himself in Lee Harvey Oswald and so on, and the stuff about bald men, and so he upsets a lot of people, and he's happy to do that again because he's got to. In that sense, I said earlier that he has all this mythologizing and they're obsessed with facts, but when it comes to sort of being true to yourself rather than a cause or something, he's not gonna pretend to be something else or try and fit in or do, and he just
He's
it's quite
maverick.
Nietzschean. He becomes what he is, and it's quite Nietzschean, and he will do it. He's not going to conform. And there's a kind of, in that sense, there's a higher truth that he's very, very sort of, he takes very seriously, which kind of fits with his Christian phase later.
So
Yeah.
this is when he's awarded the Tom Paine Award for Civil Liberties, and lots of people who are big in the American kind of old left, really, I suppose, or left figures, give him this award, and they're there. And he Susie Rotello, his girlfriend, who's played as Sylvie Russo in this film, she, in her rather moving book, autobiography, A Freewheeling Time, she talks about Dylan preparing for before that speech he gave at that award ceremony where he got drunk, and I think it's a mixture of he gets nervous and also feels he's got to come out with the truth. So he does come out with this kind of Nietzschean stuff about maybe there's something of Lee Harvey Oswald in all of us and all that. Yeah, but that's left out, isn't it? And maybe they could have made more of the March on Washington. He does also go to Mississippi, and there's a scene of him singing Only a Paul in Their Game in kind of Mississippi. And it was a very stirring time in American politics, I guess, in the early 60s. And Dylan is a part of that. I mean, interestingly, I think in the Village, in Greenwich Village, Dave Van Ronk, who doesn't appear much in the film. I think he's in a cafe, a bar where Dylan goes into, and he points the way to Woody Guthrie. And Dave Van Ronk was highly political, as well as being a very interesting musician. So, yeah, so there was a politics there, and maybe music and politics was mixed up more than it has been at times later on, Jan. Do you think?
Yeah, I think it was a very political moment for music. I think throughout the 60s and towards the end of the 60s, well, they felt that music really could change the world in a way that I think maybe people are a bit more jaded about it now, or they don't think music could change the world on such a grand scale as seemed possible in the 60s, and which is a shame, really. But I think there was a close link between them. But I think the other thing that's about this film is it's really about the moment in it's a musical film, so it's about the folk thing, and it's about the purity of folk as a genre. So the politics get left out of it. But interesting, when he's walking, when he goes into bars and things, you can hear everybody's muttering about, oh, the British invasion shouldn't be happening. Oh, everybody's going electric. Oh, this is real folk. Oh, but that person's playing that. Just muttering everywhere they go. And almost every scene where you see all the kind of folk, the people running the festival, they're all discussing what is folk music, what's real folk music, this is real, this is not real. So they really focus on the authenticity of the genre, which in some ways, I mean, if it's inauthentic, you might argue it can't therefore carry a really good political message because it's been corrupted in some way, and they don't go into that. But I think it's because it's about the genre, the musical, the authenticity of the genre is what they're really concerned about in the film, rather than.
But it is interesting, isn't it, that the form of music as well as the content of music is political.
Yes.
And Dylan breaks with a political taboo in exploring and developing the form of the music.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's good. So were you in Greenwich Village in the 60s, Scarlett?
Oh no, I was in high school still.
Right, sorry. Yeah. But you were in the Village later, weren't you, in the 70s?
Yes.
And what was that like then? Very different?
It was very different, and I was part of that era where we did think music could change the world, and we felt the signs of it actually having an impact. I went to Washington in the march against the Vietnam War, and it was there was 1 million people there.
Yeah.
And you know, so
yeah, I mean, yeah. So there was a powerful sense of the political in the music. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that the film doesn't go into, I suppose, is the beginnings of a counterculture and kind of drug taking and kind of the singer-songwriter being separate. That comes a bit later, but the counterculture is only just beginning by the more Dylan is part of it, I suppose, in the mid-60s. But it doesn't make much of drugs at that point.
And the beats, you don't get a sense of the beats, the beat poets proceeding.
Yeah. And because that shows the richness of Dylan's background, doesn't it? Because the beats are a pretty big part of it as well. Yeah.
And also and rock music, I mean, not that it was called rock music at the time, but you don't get, the Beatles are mentioned, the British invasion is mentioned, but what that actually was and what it meant and how they were experimenting with different sounds. So, you know, the use of the whistle, Highway 61, it's like the Beatles had also used weird sounds. So it's that the fact that he's kind of interacting with another form of music is only mentioned derogatorily. It's not explored what that would be, but of course, you know, it is only one film. But yeah, so we
Yeah.
hear the Kinks. That's all that we get out of it. But it's yeah, I thought that was interesting too, and an interesting omission.
And some things are left out, maybe, and maybe they have to be left out. I mean, some people have said that the Byrds and their kind of role in providing some electric folk with Mr. Tambourine Man are not there. I've heard someone say that Dylan's visit to England in 1962 and 1963, where he picks up some traditional English folk songs and develops, that isn't included in the film. And I guess my thought is, it's one film, isn't
Yeah.
it? You know, they can't do everything. What do you think about what some people have said? I think Mark Commode said that it was wrong that they changed some of the facts, that, for instance, the Judas, when someone cries out Judas for Dylan going electric, that didn't happen at the Newport Folk Festival. It happened subsequently in Manchester in 1966, Manchester, UK, and they transposed that to Newport in 65. Is that an untruth? Does that undermine the film? There are other things which have changed. Dylan didn't perform in Greystoke Hospital to Woody Guthrie with Pete Seeger present. You know, that's a concocted scene. There are other scenes which are kind of made up, you know, and not kind of. Johnny Cash wasn't at the 65 Newport Folk Festival, so they changed things around. Are you happy with that? Is that okay? Jan, you were saying that you get some students who write about music from watching some documentaries, and they put in as facts things which aren't facts.
Yeah, that's right. I had some students who they've used films like Bohemian Rhapsody as a historical straight source. Because there are no warnings on these films that say, I mean, there's the usual very small thing at the end saying some of this has been fictionalized, but there's nothing at the beginning that tells you how far they move from the facts. I think I have really mixed feelings about it. I think a lot of the they've kind of just telescoped things together, haven't they? So the Judas moment is really important in the mythology of Dylan. It encapsulates how extreme the audience response was. It would have diluted the effect of it if you'd had him do two performances, all of which he's booed out. You know, they need to capture it in one thing. So I think it kind of captures the emotional truth of what happened by distorting the historical truth. And I think that makes it a more powerful film about music. But it is problematic if people start thinking that that's what actually really happened. So yeah, I don't know but I don't know how you get around that. I don't know if you started with big letters saying some of this has been made up. Would that undermine the film? Would anybody remember by the end? You know, there's lots of questions about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you. What about you, Scarlett and Constantine? Do you think that was, do you think that undermines the film, the omissions and the changing of facts, or the portrayal of things which didn't happen?
Scarlett, you want to go first?
Okay, well, I agree about the emotional truth. The emotional truth is really there, and from beginning to end, and some of the, you know, the fact that it was in London, it wasn't Manchester, it wasn't at the folk festival. I mean, I am not bothered by it because they couldn't. It is a matter of you know, trying to capture it all in one. All of these events, they would have had to recreate recreate Manchester just for that one moment, and they just had to end the film with a kind of the cliffhanger of where his life is going to go, and and why jump to another country just for that one liner, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and you think, like Jan, that say that Judas shout captures an emotional truth about the performance at Newport?
yeah,
You know,
I
someone
do.
could have shouted that out.
They could have, indeed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And you've got to make it. I actually think the scene with Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, and singing song to Woody is very moving. You know, it
I
sets
thought
up,
it was too. I thought it
yeah,
was too.
and it's
by
a
the
great
way,
song. Yeah.
by the way, there are very untrue things in Rolling Thunder. I mean, in the Martin Scorsese film that are
Yeah.
actually not true that do bother me. But
Yeah, yeah, because you were in that film and it purported to be a documentary, and
Yeah.
there are untruths in it, you know. And was that Dylan kind of influencing Scorsese to make things up? I don't know.
one doesn't know,
One
but
doesn't know. Yeah,
I can presume. But the fact is, it disqualified them for an Oscar consideration because you can't fictionalize a documentary. And
no.
some of the
So
things
one thing I
really
do,
fictionalized.
one thing I do hear about that film is that everyone I know who's seen it thinks you're wonderful in it.
Ah.
You come across really well. But yeah, it is a bit of a shame because it's potentially a great film, I think. You know,
I did like the live footage is great, and so much about it I appreciated, but nobody gave me a heads up about what was going to be false, and
really.
so I
Right.
was pretty shocked.
What about you, Constantine? Do you think that the made up scenes spoil it or kind of enhance it?
So we were talking earlier about sort of authenticity versus facts, and there's something just very Dylan-esque about trying to not worrying about facts to get to the heart of the matter, to try and get the authentic stuff right, even if factually it's not sort of technically true. And I was reading, I think you've read it as well, the Rolling Stone interview with Timothy Chalamet, where he says, oh, and Dylan insisted that we put this one falsehood in the film, like an Easter egg for people to guess what it is. And it's like there's falsehoods left, right, and center. There's like 20,
Yeah.
30 things. But and we can talk about what that might be, but I think it's something that's not just a mere fact, but like a completely fabricated thing that's not part of the whole story. But I think in some ways Pete Seeger represents a bunch of different people, including the Mackenzies, for example, and maybe other people on whose
Van
couch he
Ronk.
slept. Yeah, Van Ronk, who does appear briefly, and so on. All these people who helped him, and in some ways, it's not just about going electric or whatever. In some ways, it's a film about what happens when you outgrow the very people who helped you become what you are. In a way, there's all these people who recognize something in Dylan and facilitate him and help him and give him food and introduce him to people and gigs and a place to stay and money and all these things, and within a few years they kind of feel betrayed by him, and so there's got that kind of, that's a universal story. You don't need to be into Dylan to appreciate that. And I think if it focused too much on the facts, we'd lose this kind of very powerful story that is true in a way to what these people felt, and how Dylan, he could, as Joan says in the film, could be a bit of an asshole towards them, but at the same time, and Maggie's Farm is partly about this. He's not going to be held back.
Yeah.
Because of this, and then it leads to bigger questions, relating to art and ethics and so on. So I think first time I watched it, the Judas thing grated a bit with me, more than the other stuff. But I see why it's there, and like Scarlett was saying, they'd either have to omit it or do this very weird thing where we move on to 66 in Manchester or whatever.
Fine, that makes a lot of sense, and that's interesting. But when you say there that he's accused of being an asshole, I think by Joan Baez, is he an asshole in the film? I find that he's not really. That he's pretty set in developing his own kind of way forward. But does that make him an asshole? It strikes me he'd be a difficult person to be in a relationship with, but he's pretty driven, isn't he? And I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Someone who's that creative, it sets his own rules to some extent.
Well,
I would,
it's funny that she should be the one who calls him an asshole because she's pretty tough cookie herself.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
And she does come across as a bit tough in the film, doesn't she? Yeah.
oh yeah.
Because I think Dylan said he didn't want, or they say that they didn't want to name Susie Rotello because everyone else in the film is kind of in the fame game, is in the game, if you see what I mean. But Susie Rotello was not. She was just having a relationship with Dylan, and the others have all got. And like Joan Baez in the film wants to sing the song "Blowing in the Wind," so she's gaining something. But he's kind of moving on as well. So
Yeah, I love the scene where she says, "This is the song we're going to sing next," and he goes, "That my guitar is just broke," And of
yeah,
course, for a fact his guitar did not break.
no,
and
and that captures an emotional truth, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's like, "I am not going to be told what to do by you anymore."
I think one question we've had in was what do the panel think about the depiction of gender relations in this film? Early 60s, Greenwich Village, New York. Do you think is there something to be said about the gender relations? Do you think it does capture them, or do you think it doesn't capture them, or are there issues about the gender relations which are worth commenting on? Jan, have you got any strong thoughts on this or initial thoughts?
Expert in gender relations in the early 60s. So I would like to know more, have more detail of the question from the questioner, if that's possible. But I don't know that the two females, they were both quite strong leads. Sylvia's an artist, and it's very clear that she's an artist. She's not just a girlfriend. I thought it was quite an interesting depiction, but yeah, I'd like to know more about the question, really.
I think the question is, do the panelists think the gender politics of the early 60s in the USA were adequately represented in A Complete Unknown? And I think you're saying you'd like to know more about it. It's made you curious about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I did read the biography, or the autobiography of Terry Tull, the wife of Dave Van Ronk. And I think she said, and she's quite sympathetic to Dylan and to Susie Rotello, and she knew both of them pretty well. And I think they stayed on their floor sometime, or stayed at their house. But she said that there was one occasion they all played cards, poker, at the Van Ronk's place, a lot of the artists, and that Dylan sometimes would put his hand and stop Susie from betting or from doing something, and she thought that was bad, and maybe that kind of shows gender relations at the time, because I think in the film he's not shown as stopping people doing something or kind of insisting they do something. He probably doesn't listen to them. I mean, I think Sylvie Russo is saying, "I don't know anything about you. I tell you about myself. I'd like to know about yourself." The reciprocity is maybe not quite there, but I don't know. I mean, I think Terry Tull was saying that at times there was a gendered kind of assertion that was going on. And I guess it was a gendered time, wasn't it? In that the village was probably, and the music scene was male dominated, was it? I suspect.
I suspect, but also, people took it literally. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. I mean, I actually took that very literally. And I'm sure millions of people did, women too.
So it was liberatory.
Totally.
Yeah.
It was a get out of jail card.
Yeah. So, and that helped change the atmosphere for women as well as men.
It did, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the scene you're talking about her telling him, "Well, I know, my aunt, your uncle, this and that, the whole thing." Well, she's really describing, however, kind of, that she's going along with the the patriarchy, the old way of thinking, and he doesn't relate. And she goes, "But you are just, the true. What do I say about you? Are just the troubadour." Yes, he is the troubadour who is going to define who he is, not by
Yeah.
my uncle, my aunt, my this person owns this, and
He's
know,
looking to go forward and make a future himself. Yeah.
without all the family connections, and don't you know who my father is, and blah blah blah.
Yeah. Were you struck by gender relations at all there, Constantine?
I mean, I think it's just one of these things that if the film tried to capture that as well, it would be too much. But there's loads of, we've got, Hattie Carroll. I mean, there's songs in Dylan's period there that he's not just some man singing for other men. That Toshi Seeger comes across like a very strong character in the film. But I was there is a contrast with the Todd Haynes film where you've got Kate Blanchett playing the kind of 66 Dylan, maybe 65, and later even. So she's got this kind of late 60s period. And she's playing this Dylan that's sort of saying, women could never be poets and whatever. So I don't know if he ever said that, but this kind of stuff. So that's and you've got this woman playing Dylan saying these things, and you've got Sarah who's absent from a complete unknown, even though by 65 it would have certainly not been Susie at Newport. There's a kind of in the Todd Haynes film that's approached quite directly, and I think a complete unknown, you got to kind of read between the lines, but it doesn't. It would be one contrast too many if it tried to sort of give us all that as well, and it would probably take away from some of the other stuff that was happening.
Concentrating on other things. It was concentrating on going electric, wasn't it? Which maybe also relates to what Scarlett's saying about this openness to the future and sons
and he's quite bad at dealing with fame in some ways, and you do see there's this fictional character, I'm trying to remember her name, Becco, who goes with him to
Becky.
Becky, and he's not exactly nice to her.
No,
so you
that's true.
you do get these glimpses.
Someone was go on.
I've remembered now what I did think about this to some extent. The thing that I did think was a bit odd about the film was at the end where Sylvie he brings her to Newport and she leaves because she can't bear to see him performing with Joan, and so she seems to be symbolizing, a traditional looking back that he's moved away from. She thought she could move forward with him, but she can't. But as my understanding is that that's all fictionalized, and I did wonder why that was there. It kind of undercuts, and there's the call out to Now Voyager, and it's like it does kind of undercut the rest of the narrative. So it ties up their love story, but in a really odd, fabricated way. At this moment of great excitement, where music is transforming forever. So I did think that was strange, but I think that's more of the film's decision rather than anything to do with trying to depict the 60s. So I thought that was an odd aspect of the story. But I'm not sure.
It seemed to have to deal with quite a few things, and it squeezed them together.
So I didn't like. I'm just going to butt in. I didn't like that aspect of the story, but I was talking with Mick Gold, who I think is here, and he was saying, one candidate for the fictional piece is that Bette Davis film they go to see instead of the Picasso exhibition. And then what that story does at the fence is it brings those Bette Davis, so you've got two things that are completely fictional, that they're doing something, but whether the film would be better without them is I think up for grabs.
One thing that it just struck me when I was listening to both of you, Jan, is that in terms of song and in terms of song in film, it does strike me that the songs do relate to the narrative, and that when Dylan is singing with Joan Baez, "It Ain't Me, Babe," Sylvie listens to it and is thinking, well, it's not me, and that Dylan is saying he's not going to be anyone's. And that's quite powerful, and it's a register of feeling that he has, and it relates to the characters in the film, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think there's another moment where she's watching him play the times they are changing at the previous thing, and you can see, and she's crying, and you can see that she's losing. She can see the times are changing for her as well as for everybody else because she's losing him to this other. So yeah, and I think, and they also, there's a cut at one point where, and you hear "Don't think twice, it's all right," and it seems to reflect on the relationship. So yes, I think there are lots of very careful links with the biography and what the songs are saying at different points. But yeah.
When earlier, I'll go to some of the questions again in the chat, but Scarlett, you were saying that at the end of Newport 65, rather than going on to Manchester, they left it at a cliffhanger. Do you think there are other potential kind of biopics of Dylan which could carry on this story? I was just wondering, you knew him in the 70s. Do you think that would make a film, a kind of biopic of Dylan?
Unquestionably, because his life, considering you wrote Dylan at 80, we got 70 more years to go.
There's a lot to go, isn't there? You know, because after this film, there's the tour of England, there's Woodstock, there's the work with the band, there's marriage and family life, there's the film with Sam Peckinpah, there's kind of touring with the band, and then there's Blood on the Tracks, and then there's you know, so there's a lot that follows, and then the 80s are interesting. Would you make another film of Dylan, Constantine?
I mean, I don't think I should make it, but I'd love to see one, and
Yeah.
I'd love to see. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you were taking like 5-year period, 74 to 79 or 75 to 80, where you go from Dylan coming back to the village from Woodstock, meeting Scarlett, doing Rolling Thunder, and then by the end we've already got, you know, Slow Train coming and another betrayal of sorts and so on. I mean, if you're looking for sort of, you know, a sort of 5-year period to focus on, that kind of return to the village, and then until the sort of first of the so-called Christian albums would be pretty. I'd love to see that, with everything in between, Street Legal, of course, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What you said about Mick Gold talking about the cash letters, he's written to us to say that as well. Someone also wrote saying that there could have been more on the modernism of going electric in music, you know, and brought in other kind of people. But I guess the riposte to that is there's a limit to what they can do. Someone's written into you, Scarlett, and asking what your favorite Dylan songs are, the top 3 if it's too difficult, and it would be too difficult.
Impossible.
Impossible. Yeah.
It changes from time to time, you know?
Does it? Yeah. Is there one that comes into your head right now as we're speaking?
Hard Rain.
Hard Rain, yeah. Well, that's a pretty powerful song, and that's in the film, isn't it? Someone's written in to say he was a friend of Howie Wyeth. He knew Rob Stoner, friendly with Lenny Nelson. I love your playing, and I know you played with the likes of Mercer Ellington as well as Bob. Was glad, and he liked your comment, "Can you stop a Rolling Stone?" And someone says that Maggie's Farm wasn't based on Penny's Farm. It was, but I think that's because it was the basis for Hard Times in New York. But I think it was maybe both. But there we are. So, yeah.
And I love Howie Wyeth too. Howie Wyeth was one of my favorite band members.
And he died, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, which is sad. Yeah.
Unassuming. And nobody, he would never tell anyone that he was that his uncle was a famous, Andrew Wyeth. I mean, you're never going to hear that from him, because he was just show up and play, and that's it. And just.
And someone here does say that Wilde's book, and I agree with them, makes the case that something genuinely tragic happened at Newport, as well as it being a moment of triumph for a new style. You know, it's a triumph of modernism over traditional forms, and of individual style over the collective voice. And I think that is true. Someone's written in to say that one negative take on the film is that it portrays Alan Lomax as a jerk. And could it have been fairer in its portrayal of him? It does show in the Alan Lomax was this collector of traditional music and early music, and it shows him fighting with Albert Grossman over Dylan going electric, whereas in fact that fight was about the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, because Alan Lomax had said something negative about an earlier performance of the Butterfield Blues Band. But interesting thing, I think Dylan has referred positively to Alan Lomax subsequently, and he's obviously an important figure. Do you think it was unfair on Lomax?
I mean, he's a hugely important figure to a lot of the stuff Dylan, you know, all these kind of recordings of very early sort of American music and getting the folk and blues players recorded while they were still alive and going around, you know, doing kind of anthropology, almost field work and field recordings. You know, I don't know enough about the kind of personal stuff. Certainly it takes away, I think, before the film, I think a lot of people think of Pete Seeger as the sort of villain of Newport 65, whereas that's kind of moved a bit towards Lomax in the film, right?
Yeah, yeah. And some people say that the film maybe overplays the image of the axe and Pete Seeger going to put an axe to it, and that this is just a myth. It doesn't show him picking up an axe. And I think there were different messages in the film, and I think someone did say they actually saw Seeger. I think they probably have reported it wrongly, but they believe they saw Seeger pick up an axe. But I suppose it's a myth which the film kind of nods to. Yeah, and Ray Falk has said that maybe this music at the time isn't kind of accurately presented. That the complicated task of showing how rock and roll morphed into a more shallow pop music wasn't kind of fully depicted. And I think it does simplify the story about music, actually. And he also suggests that Dylan's humor could be described as wit. Someone has written in saying how much they admired your violin playing on the Rolling Thunder tour, Scarlett. So that's good. Uh,
I wanted to ask Scarlett a question because in the film, if I remember that there's this sort of stuff about too much pressure on songs being able to change the world, which we spoke about kind of earlier, and Dylan wanting to kind of back away from that a bit. But obviously, with Hurricane, it feels like there's a real we can make a change here with this song. Did you get a sort of feel about that? And I think Allen Ginsberg talks of protest songs in the liner notes to Desire.
Well, he was deeply invested in Hurricane, and in the song, in the fundraising. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of the promotion of that song, at Madison Square Garden, you know, had
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali is
Ali
there.
was there. Yeah.
Yeah, and Coretta Scott King was there, I believe. And then we did the Astrodome, which was also a fundraiser for his legal defense fund.
Yeah.
So they're very committed to that.
Yeah.
And Hurricane, did you meet Hurricane Carter?
I did not ever meet him, no, but we
Yeah.
did play in the prison.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which was powerful. Yeah. Okay. Ray Falk has written again to say that, you know, getting the facts wrong can be important. And he thought the film by about the Isle of Wight 1970 music festival, they got that wrong, and that was reprehensible. But he thinks it was okay to depict the Newport film. Sorry, to have the Judas quote in Newport rather than Manchester. Yeah, and Ray also says he's been negotiating doing a film with Dylan at the Isle of Wight for a long time. And so maybe that's in the that might happen. So so there we are.
That's great footage. That would be really good.
Yeah.
By the way, I did play sit in with Paul Butterfield when he was alive.
Wow.
Did you?
Yeah,
Right.
When
Yeah.
was that? What period do you?
it was 76.
Wow. That's so cool.
77. Probably 77, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, and someone writes in about, you know, making up things is part of the Dylan world, and look at the made up things in the Rolling Thunder documentary. But I know that you've got mixed feelings on that, haven't you? The made up stuff. Yeah. Because the
I thought it
Scorsese
was
film,
well done here, though. I thought it was well done in this movie.
yeah.
And versus the not so well done in Rolling Thunder.
Yeah. You didn't like some of that, and you're saying you didn't know they were going to do that.
No.
It was
Which
a bit
seems-
mockumentary-ish, wasn't it?
yeah. Someone's written in saying that neither Bob Dylan nor Dave Rank were particularly chauvinistic, and that maybe is true. Terry has actually said she wanted to tie Terry, that's the wife of Dave Van Ronk, wanted to entitle her book "I Never Carried His Guitar." So that kind of yeah.
And she said she watched the film and thought Van Ronk wasn't in it. That's how brief his appearance
Well,
was.
it is quite brief, and given that he did play quite a role, you know, but then some people are left out, aren't they? Nicola Yates, a friend, has written in asking about the made-up things in the Scorsese Rolling Thunder documentary. Is there anything in there that you would highlight as being kind of obtrusively made up, you know, misleadingly made up?
The guy who was supposedly the videographer, he
Yeah.
was not the videographer. He is Bette Midler's husband.
Yeah,
He was
he's a performance artist. Yeah.
Yeah, he was an actor and all that. He was not a videographer.
Yeah.
I don't believe the actress was there.
Sharon Stone. There's that weird Sharon Stone stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So there's yeah. So yeah, so are there any kind of it's 6:15. I mean, are there any kind of any issues, topics that you kind of would want to kind of highlight that maybe we haven't kind of anything that you want to say before we throw this kick this into touch? Anything? Is there one performance of a song which you think is really memorable and really does work? You thought The Times They Are Changing. A few people have mentioned that was quite powerful.
I thought when he goes back to the studio to do Highway 61, the song is pretty, and you can just see how much fun they're having. I thought that was pretty striking.
Yeah. And it's interesting when he plays with the blues singer, Jesse,
Yes.
who's actually Muddy Waters' son, apparently.
Big
And
Bill.
yeah, and that is pretty powerful. And I think that is important because it does convey Dylan's love of music, you know, because he plays along with that guy and it makes a lot of sense. And that's really good. So that's good.
Beautiful scene. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any
And
go on?
one thing I'd say to people who haven't seen it is to watch Timothy Chalamet's Saturday Night Live performances, which are really quite brilliant. And he does 3 Dylan covers, but unlike the film, he's not trying to be Dylan. He's not acting as Dylan. He's Timothy Chalamet playing Dylan songs. There's a different kind of liberty. I mean, he does 3 Angels, and Tomorrow Is a Long Time, and he does one that is in the Dylan film. Is it Outlaw Blues he does? but
Yeah, well, that is it. I mean, that is
but
really
it's a
good.
very different performance. It's a very, very different performance, and really worth seeing in their own right. Those three songs.
By the way, someone's written, thanks. I mean, I thought it was well worth it. Yeah, someone's written into saying how cool it is to be this close to Scarlett Rivera. So there we are. So, and I think that would go for the rest of the panel as well. So, and someone likes the way it portrays artists during their youth. It shows their development and that they don't have everything figured out before they get to where they're going. And that is true. And their lives are messy, and that's important. Though I did think at one point, I think the Susie Ritello character says to Dylan, "You're a contrarian." And I think that adjective is something we would use about Dylan now, but I'm not sure people would have used it at the time. You know, we're now clearer that he's a contrarian and that he will kind of like on the Academy Awards, he didn't show he was invited, but he didn't do it, as Mick Jagger said. So you know, he's a
pretty contrarian in the Bill of Rights.
What
book,
the
though.
Yeah, okay. You think that's okay calling him a contrarian because he is?
They do take a few lines from later interviews and put them in Dylan's mouth. Scarlett alluded to this kind of finding yourself versus creating yourself, and that comes from. I think he gets it from Bernard Shaw, but it comes from a later kind of Dylan interview. So there are these little things here and there that may be anachronistic, strictly speaking.
But people notice things, and someone has just written in to say, shout out to Constantine's God Gave Names to All the Animals t-shirt. So
and beautiful cat.
Oh, Boss Baby, yes, made a bit of an appearance.
Yeah, so that's great. And Nicholas Yates has said, we think you're brilliant, Scarlett. So I think there's and someone says there was a girl comments in the film on Dylan's name, Zimmerman. There's a hint of anti-Semitism that isn't followed up. What's that about? Did you notice that? You're nodding, Constantine?
Yeah, but I don't want to hog the discussion. I was just nodding along.
You were just nodding. Yeah. I mean, I think I remember it, but it doesn't go into it that much, does it?
No, it's mentioned a couple of times.
Is it? Right.
Yeah. There's some posts addressed to him and it's mentioned them, and Sylvie quickly kind of hides it away, and then in a party a girl is looking at his yearbook type thing with his name on it and she quickly hides it away. So in the second scene it's more in the context of he's hiding his real roots in general, but yeah, there was, I think that it did suggest that it might have been dangerous, that there might have been an aspect of anti-Semitism that he was responding to, just very subtly in passing. But I don't know enough about the times to know if how true that was. But yeah, I thought it was very much implied that might be a reason to lose your roots and make yourself the new.
Right. The Susie Ritello autobiography, I would recommend people to read out there because it's good. She was an interesting character, and apparently Dylan did ask that she's not named because I think she was a private person. He wanted to respect that, so that seems fair enough. And she, in the autobiography, does talk about how Dylan was incredibly hardworking and picking things up, how he would respond to lots of stuff. And she worked on the art, kind of make the kind of backup, the kind of materials for the stage of the staging of Brecht on Brecht in an off-Broadway production. And Dylan went there and listened to the Brecht songs, the Kurt Weill Brecht songs, and picked up things. And I think When the Ship Comes In drew on those. So which shows that he was someone who picked up lots and lots of different things, really, which is and he's carried on doing it, isn't it? You know, I know when we had when I spoke with Carolyn Hester, you know, she was saying how he what she admires most about Dylan is his continued creativity. And when there's talk in that film about the Voyager, the film, the Bette Davis film, and Dylan says no, she became different, you know, and he's not looking for a perfect ending. He's looking for doing different things and being continually creative. and that's pretty powerful. Yeah, so we've got 5 minutes left, and I think we're more or less near the end here. And what do I think? I think that it is marvelous that we've had, you know, this panel kind of producing kind of lots and lots of thoughtful stuff about this Dylan film, and it's wonderful to be with Scarlett, who knew Dylan, and it seems like you respect him a great deal. You know, someone who's been close, and you do respect him, and you've continued to be friendly with him. Yeah,
enormously. I mean, he's to me one of the most important figures in all of music of 20th and now 21st century.
yeah, he's certainly up there. Yeah.
I think Ray in the comments has said something similar, that you could argue that he single-handedly kind of brought about the foundation of rock as a genre. And yeah, I think there's some merit in that. I think it and I think this film did miss a trick in not pointing to his continued relevance in that way. But yeah, I think it certainly shows what an innovative person he was and how important it was in musical history, which is really good.
Yeah, and he is. And Ray Falk's written in to say something about your to say how much he appreciates your violin playing with Dylan in the 70s, and that's true. And someone else has written in to say they think the discussion has been terrific. I certainly think it's been terrific. You know, I could go on for another 3 hours, but I won't, in fact.
I
yeah.
hope we'll get a Scarlett Rivera documentary at some point.
Yeah.
Well, people are talking about it, but I will have a serious conversation with you guys behind the scenes.
Well, it would be great. It would be great, because you certainly kind of merit a documentary, and we'd love to be kind of contribute. That would be fantastic. And I think go on.
Jan, did you see the Priscilla film? And do you think we could have like a Joan Baez film? That's, you know, not to kind of. Do you think that would be an interesting film to have?
Yeah, to show the flip side. Yeah, I think it would be.
Yeah.
I think the Elvis and Priscilla, when they played them off to each other, show a very different story. That would be very interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
And you know, Joan, there's lots of interesting music in there that also, you know, she was also very pivotal in this moment. And yeah, I think it would be good to have something about her too.
And I agree with Constantine. You gave us only 5 points to rate the movie, and I will give it a 6.
Yes.
So it's gone up to 6.
6 out of 5.
Yeah,
It goes up to 6
out of 5. Yeah, I mean, I think it. As I said earlier, I've been incredibly impressed with the fact that people who are not Dylan aficionados love it. You know, and it's opened them to Dylan. And that's more marvelous. And we've got 1 minute left, and this will end. But all endings are a new beginning, as Dylan might say. And so thank you very much for participating. I've enjoyed it a lot, and I hope everyone out there has. So many, many thanks.
Thank you so much, Gary, and also Laura and Jess, and of course all the questions we got.
Yeah,
I hope we
answered
answered
questions, and Laura and Jess did really well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Very much.
Thank you.
Okay.